Okay.
Computer question, what is this?
The box. The box open.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
The box opens.
Oh, how do I get rid of it?
Sure, I'm not familiar with that program. Yeah, you click it so you can move it to a lock your screen. I have no idea. I'm not familiar with that program, so no, it should be in settings. Something's like that.
What chapter?
You might need this. Chapter 5.
Oh, 5.
Good morning, everyone.
More.
Before we begin class, Bob, would you start us off with a word of prayer?
Our Father who art in heaven, we come before you with thanksgiving for all that we have and all that we are. Today we pray for Carrie that you might remember the things he prepared to teach, that he might proclaim your word boldly as he always does, and that each of us as students might be active listeners. We ask forgiveness and mercy. We ask in Christ's name. Amen.
Okay, this morning we're going to be starting in Leviticus chapter 5. We're going to begin just reading verse 1 this morning, and then we'll go from there. In Leviticus 5 here, the first 4 verses, we're going to read about 3 specific sins, and then we're going to read about what they were to do for those sins for the offering. But let's just read verse 1. We'll take these one at a time. So Leviticus, we're going to start off this morning reading Leviticus 5 and verse 1. And Jim, would you read that?
If a person sins in hearing the utterance of an oath and is a witness, whether he has seen or known of the matter, if he does not tell it, he bears guilt.
Okay, what's the sin here? What? Swearing? No. Huh?
If you see a sin and you don't say something.
Well, it even goes further than that, doesn't it? Not just see. If you, this is like someone who has witnessed a crime, or someone that has witnessed some kind of a situation. Somehow he's being called in to say, okay, I need you to, so they're calling for information, whether it's in court, like we go to court. It used to be, I don't know if they still do it anymore, but they would swear you in if you're going to testify. You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Here they're being asked or being questioned, and there's under oath. So they're being asked questions about something, and whether they know about it or they've heard something about it. If they do, they're supposed to tell it. Whatever information they have or knowledge they have of what the situation of the crime is, they're supposed to share that. And here in this case, they do not. They remain silent. And that here is sin. Am I understanding that correctly, Chris? That's the way it, yeah. I just want to make sure. But so we got someone here that's being called in, maybe as a witness, and being asked questions about what happened, and they don't say anything. They say, I didn't see anything, or I didn't hear anything. And this here goes, it's not just what they saw whether he has seen or known of the matter. So maybe he heard secondhand, he heard something, or he knows something somehow other than just seeing it. Whatever information they have, they were supposed to share it. They're under oath, but they don't do it. So in the King James, it says, hearing the utterance of an oath. I think the New King James. I think the King James says, hear the voice of swearing. Is that what it says, Carl? Verse 1 says, here is the voice of swearing.
Swearing.
Yeah, that's talking about an oath when it says that. Let's turn and read, in talking about that word, the King James says swearing, the New King James says oath, and that's exactly what it's talking about, giving an oath. You're swearing, but you're swearing to tell the truth. You're making an oath. Let's turn back to, and we read about this, let's turn back to Genesis chapter 24. And we're going to read two different verses here, but Genesis 24, we're going to start off by reading verse 3. Genesis 24 and verse 3. And Melody, would you read that?
And I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell.
So Abraham is sending one of his servants to get Isaac a wife. And here he has that servant swear to him, give him an oath, that he will not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan, that he will go where he tells him. Okay, now let's flip over to verse 41. Verse 3 says swear. Now verse 41. In verse 41 we have the same word that's translated swear in the King James, but Genesis 24 verse 41. And Carl, would you read that? Verse 41.
Then shalt thou be clear from this my oath when you come to my kindred. Or if they give not thee one, thou shalt be clear of my oath.
Okay, so the servant says, okay, I'll go, I'll do what you want to do, I'll go see to your family like you want to do, but what if she doesn't want to come? Or what if the family says she can't come? Here we have Abraham saying, if they won't let her come, then you're free from this oath I'm giving, that you swore to me. So anyway, verse 3, we see it says swear. Verse 41, it says oath. That's what we're talking about here in Leviticus 5, verse 1, 2. It's talking about someone giving an oath. Let's turn and read from, and to me, this is just common sense, isn't it? If you're in something like this and they're looking for information, we're talking about some kind of the leadership, or it's almost like they're going to court, or they're trying to find information for some reason, and you have that information, and they put you under oath, or they want you to swear, and you do have information and you don't tell it. Isn't that just kind of common sense that that's wrong? You're withholding the truth, aren't you? Is that not being deceitful? But the fact that God had to put it in his law, that's not a good thing for us, is it? It's saying a lot about us. But let's turn over to Proverbs chapter 29 and read verse 24. Proverbs 29, verse 24. And Jerry, would you read that?
29:24.
Yes, Proverbs 29, verse 24.
Whosoever is partnered with the theft, him in his own soul, he generous is cursing, and his beware is not.
Okay,
So
here.
you become part of the.
Yeah, again, the end of this verse in the New King James, he swears to tell the truth but reveals nothing. And it goes along with the first phrase, whoever's a partner with a thief. So here again, we got the same idea. they're under oath, and they're being asked questions, but they don't answer it. And when you do that, what situation does that put you in? It's like you participated in the crime. Isn't that what we're reading about here? It says here, whoever is a partner with a thief, he who swears to tell the truth but reveals nothing. So in God's eyes, if we have information and we don't give it, it's like we participated in that crime. It's in verse 1, it says, you'll bear your guilt. That's what it's talking about. We won't take time to read, but there's several places, but 1 Kings 8, verse 31, again, this same Hebrew word that's translated swear in the King James is translated oath, again, in 1 Kings 8, verse 31. But we have an example of this in the New Testament. That someone, we're going to turn there shortly, someone that was not speaking, but someone puts them under oath, and then they answer. And you might be surprised who it is that what I'm talking about. Chris already knows, but let's turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 26. Matthew 26, we're going to read verses 62 to 64. And Stacy, would you read that? Matthew 26, verses 62 to 64.
And the high priest arose and said to him, do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, it is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven.
Okay, we studied this when we studied the book of Matthew. Jesus was silent for most of this stuff that was going on, right? And that was prophesied that he would be silent, like a sheep going to the slaughter. But here, what did the priest do? The high priest. I put you under oath. Answer me, are you this? And Jesus answered. He did not remain silent. So we can see that this part of the law here, again, of course, Jesus followed the law. He was perfect. He did not sin. But that's the purpose of what the priest is doing here. He's trying to get information. He wants Jesus to answer, and Jesus is being silent. So here we have the high priest putting him under oath. And at that point, Jesus does answer, yes, I am the Son of God. So we see this happening. So in this situation, somebody that has information, whether they're a friend of yours, whether they're not a friend of yours, it doesn't matter. In this case, the law of Moses, if you had information on anything and you're being put under oath, you are to answer, period. Whether you knew about it firsthand or you heard secondhand about something, if you had any information, period, you're supposed to share that. Merwin, you had a comment?
Yeah, could you say the same thing about Peter denying Christ? That in essence, that's about the same. You just reminded me about Ananias and Sapphira. I mean, that's another example.
Well, that
very false witness. So,
yeah, we're going to talk about that just a little bit, but yeah, that's a little different idea. They actually lied, didn't we? They did bear false witness. Here we're talking about somebody under oath that does know and doesn't say anything. False witness is someone that lies about somebody else. It's still deceitful, but that is, you could say this is false witness because you have the truth and you don't share it. But when it talks about false witness, most of the time we're going to read it, it's talking about a lie, someone that's lying. Here, they're not saying anything. In this case, they keep their mouth shut. Again, that's wrong. And at the end of the chapter, at the end of the verse, if he does not tell it, he bears guilt. He has sinned. Again, it's like from those other verses we read, it's like he actually participated in the crime because he did not, or the situation, not necessarily a crime, whatever might arise, that he was put under oath. If he doesn't say whatever information he has, he's wrong. Go ahead, Michelle.
I watch a lot of crime shows, and
let's say, hypothetically, you're being called in and questioned about something that perhaps your child did. You don't want to have to say anything that might incriminate your child, but to be truthful as a Christian, and well, this here we're studying as a law of Moses, but it still would apply to us, wouldn't it? You got to tell the truth, don't you? You may not want to, because you don't know what's going to happen to your child because of this, but it doesn't matter here. There's no conditions here. If you're under oath and you know something, you've got to tell it, or you're wrong. It's like you participated in the crime. So we can see why sometimes someone might not want to answer, but still, to be truthful and not be deceitful, we've got to answer. To not be guilty of sin, we've got to be able to answer. That's what we're reading about here in the Old Law. But of course, that premise would still carry on even in the New Testament. Can't be deceitful. Can't be a liar. Just one verse talking about bearing guilt, being responsible for your guilt. You're having to carry that load because you did something wrong. Let's turn to Numbers chapter 14. Get my fingers to work. Numbers 14, and we're going to read just verses 33 and 34. And this is after the spies has gone in the land of Canaan, and they come back with a report, and they decide they're not going to go into the land of Canaan, even though Joshua and Caleb said, let's go, God is with us. The other 10 came back with a bad report, and they decide not to go, and this is part of God's reply to them. So let's read verses 33 and verse 34. And Hilda, would you like to read that? Numbers 14, verses 33 and 34.
Shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and bear the burdens of infidelity until the tasks are summoned in the wilderness, according to the number of the days in which you spread out the land, 40 days, each day you bear your guilt, 1 year and 40 years, and you shall be known by rejection.
They turned God down, and they had to bear their guilt. And what did that mean, to bear their guilt? They were going to get punished, right? What was their punishment? They don't get to go to the land of promise, period. You're going to die in the wilderness because you turned me down. You flat turned your back on me. Here in verse 33 in the New King James, it says, that the children would bear the brunt of their infidelity. So they turned their back on God. And we know that all of them that were 20 years old and older, died in the wilderness. And the next generation, the ones that went and moved in the promised land. But what I just want to get out of this, they had to bear their guilt. There was punishment there, wasn't there? And that was rough, wasn't it? Not to saying they didn't deserve it, but they didn't get to go into the land of promise. They wandered for 40 years until all of them were dead with Joshua and Caleb. Their children, even, because the children had to be in the wilderness with them, didn't they? So they bear the brunt of some of their sin. And we read about that. Isn't the only time that happened, that the children bear part of the brunt of someone's sin. But here, they bear the guilt. They received the punishment because they were guilty. Bob, go ahead.
I had a comment about back in Matthew 5, where we were. We continue reading. Verse 37 says, "But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these comes of evil." And I think the separation is when you're called upon to testify in a legal proceeding, and you have to, you solemnly swear
absolutely. I was just looking in my notes, I had that verse somewhere and I can't find it, but yes, when you go through this whole process about the oath and all that, when you come to the New Testament, like Bob said, Jesus just says, you don't need to worry about an oath. When you answer, just tell the truth. If it's yes, say yes. If it's no, say no. Then you don't have to worry about it. Jesus goes even further than that. You don't need to be put under oath. Tell the truth. And that's, that's true. That we shouldn't have to worry about it. As Christians, no one should say, you're under oath, now tell me the truth. As a Christian, they know, if they know you, they should know they're going to get the truth without having to say that or assume anything the worse. But yes, we read about that in Matthew, that Jesus says, just tell the truth. And in talking about what you brought up a minute ago, Merwin, in Exodus 20, verse 16, I'm not going to read these verses, I'm just going to refer to them. Exodus 20:16 says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And then here in Proverbs 6, verse 19, a false witness who speaks lies. And Exodus 23:1, don't circulate a false report. In other words, don't lie and spread it around. Don't be an unrighteous witness. So here we're talking about false witness as someone that's actually speaking. He's lying, but he's saying something. Here in Leviticus 5, he knows something and doesn't say anything. A little bit different, but either way, it's talking about someone that's not being truthful, isn't it? And then we won't take time to read, but in Deuteronomy 19, verses 16 through 20, it talks about a false witness. And when it's determined that that false witness was lying, whatever he was accusing his neighbor of, whatever that crime was, that was going to be his punishment. If he accused his neighbor of murder, then he would suffer for murder because he lied about his neighbor. That was the punishment back then for being a false witness. So again, when it comes to God's law, he means what he says, and he's very serious about this. So if someone's going to lie on somebody else and accuse them of doing something they didn't do, you better think about that, because if they find out that you lied, you're going to be charged with that crime. And then just one thing, we already talked about a little bit about the New Testament. In Matthew 26, verse 59, we read that the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus. These are the religious leaders of the Jews, the chief priests, the elders, and all the council. They were supposed to be the ones that were to be examples to the people. And we just read the law. You're not to be deceitful, whether you're keeping your mouth shut or if you are talking. It's not to be lying. And what were they doing? They weren't searching the truth, were they? That was their job, to search for the truth. They were looking for someone to lie. Is that not ironic that the leaders of the Jews were looking for someone to lie for them? Because they didn't want to lie. They thought that was okay. If they found somebody else to lie for them, it's okay. But they're still part of that. What we're talking about right now, being silent. If they know Jesus was innocent and they didn't speak up, were they guilty? Just like a false witness, they're still guilty, aren't they? But they didn't see that, did they? They were doing, in a way, they were doing what we're reading about here in Leviticus 5:1. They knew Jesus was innocent, but they didn't want him around. So they didn't go on and say, I think he's innocent. No, they were looking for someone to lie for him. Again, I just thought that's very ironic that these spiritual leaders would do that. Okay, any comments here on verse 1? I know it's a lot of talk about just one verse, but again, it's just God's very serious about his law, and he wants us to be honest. He wanted the Israelites to be honest. Go ahead, Chris.
Just another verse that comes to mind is in Psalm 15, verse 4. That whole psalm is about the characteristics of those who will dwell in the presence of the Lord. And among those characteristics, verse 4 says that those who swear to their own hurt and do not change. The idea is of someone who swears this is true, even though it causes them harm, and they don't change their story, even though it does hurt them. So here is someone that isn't silent, someone that doesn't withhold their testimony, and is willing to speak the truth, even if it's going to cause them harm. But in the Bible, lying generally is both to speak and to withhold. And so if you are going to say something that is untrue, that's a lie. But if you even withhold something that you know is true, that's also considered a lie or deceitful. And in Revelation 21 verse 8, it says all liars will have their place in the lake of fire, those who withhold and those who speak.
You don't mean even little white lies, right, Chris? And we know that's, a lie is a lie, period. That's right. Go ahead, Terry.
Even though back then and today, whatever, if you convince everybody in the whole wide world that you're not lying, God knows the truth. God knows what's in your heart. You and God know exactly. And so, even if you convince every Tom, Dick, and Harry there is that you're not lying, you know you are, and so does God.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Merwin.
I just thought of something that's like almost like a parallel. It's a good reason for not gossiping either, because of the fact that could go, you could either be telling the truth or not telling the truth. But gossiping is kind of like parallel to some of those things.
Yeah, I referred to a verse where it says, "Don't circulate a false report." If you hear somebody say something and you don't check it out to see if it's true, and then you spread it, and it's not true, then are you not guilty? That would refer to gossip too, wouldn't it? If it's not true, and you shouldn't be spreading stuff about people anyway. Talking bad about people, that's condemned too. But as far as what we're talking about this morning, if you take something and it's false and you spread it around, you're still wrong. That would include gossip. Okay. Let's move on to verses 2 and 3 of Leviticus 5. Okay, there's three specific sins that are talked about, and then we're going to see what the offering is for it. That was the first one. They had information or they knew something about a crime, and they did not speak. They were guilty, just like they participated in it. So let's read verses 2 and 3 now of Leviticus 5. And Chris, would you read those?
Or if a person touches any unclean thing, whether it is the carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of an unclean livestock, or the carcass of unclean creeping things, and he is unaware of it, he also shall be unclean and guilty. Or if he touches a human uncleanness, whatever uncleanness with which a man may be defiled, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty.
Okay. It says here, it starts off, a person touches any unclean thing. Now we have some specific things brought up here. And in the verse 3, it's all talking about touching a carcass of an unclean animal. And in verse 4, verse 3, it's talking about human uncleanness. Even if they weren't aware of what they did, they're still guilty. If they did it, they're still guilty. And we talked about this in chapter 4, didn't we? There were things that the people had done that they didn't realize they had done. They were still guilty if they broke the law, even if they were unaware of it, and they had to do something about it. We see the same thing here in verses 2 and 3. Maybe they didn't know that animal was unclean, whatever they touched. Doesn't matter. If you didn't know it, you need to learn the law, because ignorance is not bliss. God still holds you guilty. If you break the law, you're guilty. And that's what we're reading here about. Now, let's go ahead and read same chapter, Leviticus 5, but let's read verse 17. We've already talked about that in chapter 4, but let's just read this one verse. Leviticus 5, verse 17. And Joetta, would you read that?
If a person sins and commits any of these things which are forbidden to be done by the commandments of the Lord, though he does not know
any of the commands. If the Israelites broke a command, even if they weren't aware that they had broke a command, they're still guilty of breaking the law, period. And we read that in chapter 4, and we're reading it again in chapter 5. Again, ignorance is not an excuse. I'm not going to get in real deep to unclean animals. We will be studying that in chapter 11. There's animals that were considered unclean and animals that weren't. Here it talks about touching the carcass of an unclean animal. And like I said, we'll go through that in chapter 11. And then as far as human uncleanness, as far as I know from my studying, basically it's talking about someone that touched any bodily fluids. But we'll get into that in chapter 15. That's what's covered there. So any of these cases that's considered unclean and you touch it, even though you are unaware, you're still guilty. That's the case we're talking about here in verses 2 and 3. So that's sin number 2. First one, you have information, you do not share it, you don't tell the truth. The second one, you've touched it, you become unclean, and you are unaware of it, but you're still guilty. So that's sin number 2. So let's go ahead now and read verse 4. And Mom, would you read that? Leviticus 5 and verse 4.
Or if a person swears speaking thoughtlessly with his lips to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that a man may pronounce by an oath, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty in any of these matters.
Again, in verse 4, it says swear, and then it says oath. Again, the same idea, huh? But here, what's the person doing wrong here in this verse, in this case?
Saying something he doesn't know the truth about.
Well, yes, it says swears and talks about an oath, and it says here whether to do evil or to do good. Like, if you try to make an oath and use God's name, it doesn't matter what kind of an oath, whether it's I'm going to do this, maybe it's a good thing, or I'm going to do that and it's a bad thing, but you're speaking rashly, you're not thinking about what you're saying. God's telling you that's wrong. Think about what you're saying. When you make an oath, you're going to make a promise, you need to follow through with it. And there's different cases that this could apply to, but here, the New King James says speaks thoughtlessly with his lips. He just comes out with it. Doesn't even think about what they're saying and what the repercussions might be of it. You need to think about something before you do that and excuse me, give an oath. And he will be guilty. Chris, you got any comment on that? Am I looking at this the wrong way, or?
Yeah, there's several examples of that, and I can't tell you exactly what are off the top of my head, but I remember they're making an oath about we're not going to eat anything until we kill David, or they did the same thing to the Apostle Paul until he's arrested. We're not going to eat anything. Or there's I can't remember his name, but he had made the oath that if we win victory, the first person that walks in, I'm going to sacrifice, and his daughter walks in. And so the idea is that you're making an oath carelessly, and it's an oath that you really didn't have the ability to do, whether it's a good oath or a bad oath, like in the example of them wanting to kill David.
Right, okay. I just want to make sure I understood it correctly, but yeah, so here you're just saying something, you're not thinking about what you're saying, and even back in the law of Moses, this idea still applies to us, doesn't it? Are we supposed to make any oaths? Are we supposed to do anything rashly with our mouth? No. We need to look at the book of James, huh? It talks about dangers of the tongue. Go ahead, Carl.
We're talking New Testament that we're not to say, I'm going to go there and stay there for a year and buy and sell and get gain. That's kind of like an oath. That's what I'm going to do when we don't take God into consideration. We'll do it if Lord permits us to do it.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. And they're condemned for that, aren't they? not putting God into it. I'm just going to go do this and that, and they don't put God into the picture, and they're condemned for doing that. Let's turn to Psalms chapter 106. Psalms 106, we're going to read verses 32 and verse 33. Here we see someone that spoke rashly, someone that you might be surprised, and he was condemned for it, though. Psalms 106, 32 and 33. And Terry, would you read that?
They angered him also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes, because they provoked his spirit, so that he spake unadvisedly with his lips.
Okay, here Moses did this, right? And because of this, what happened to Moses? Moses didn't get to enter the land of Canaan. That's right. That's what this is talking about. He got angry, and the people had him upset, and he spoke rashly. The King James said unadvisedly. This is the same Hebrew word that we read about in verse 4 about oath. What was the word? It's thoughtlessly. The same word that's translated thoughtlessly here is translated unadvisedly. Go ahead, Bob.
Probably a good example of that as there is when Moses said something to the rock. He had something to say, he shouldn't have said squat. I mean, he spoke unadvisedly, and he didn't get to go to the promised land because of it. That ought to be a fair enough warning for us.
Yes, absolutely. The first time he was told to speak to the rock, wasn't he? And the second time, I have that backwards. One time he was told to speak to the rock, one time he was told to strike the rock, but the second time he didn't do what God told him, because the children of Israel had him upset. That's still not a reason to do something wrong. And Moses had to bear the guilt of that, didn't he? As we have time, let's turn to 1 Samuel real quick. See if I can go through this quickly. 1 Samuel chapter 25. In 1 Samuel 25, David and his men there's a man named Nabal, and he is very rich. He has 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And David's men helped protect his shepherds and his flock. And his men needed some food. So he sent some messengers to Nabal, say, I need some food. And he turned them down flat. Nope, I don't recognize David, and you're not getting nothing of mine. And David had been protecting him and his flock and his shepherds. So David gets angry. Let's look at verses 21 and 22 I'm going to read. Now David had said, Surely in vain I have protected all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and has repaid me evil for good. May God do so and more also to the enemies of David, if I leave one male of all who belongs to him my morning light. David's making an oath. Nabal has made him mad. I'm going to go wipe him out. That's what he's saying. They're all going to be dead by the morning. This is an oath. Okay? Now, in verse 32 to 34, in the process of time between these verses, Nabal's wife hears what had happened, and she takes food and takes it to David and talks to David. And the result of that is, I'm going to read verses 32 to 34 now. 1 Kings 25, 32 to 34. And then David said to Abigail, Blessed is the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed is your advice, and blessed are you, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed, and from avenging myself with my own hand. For indeed, as the Lord of Israel lives, who has kept me back from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, surely by morning light no males would have been left to Nabal. David's regretting now what he said after the wife comes and talks to him and gives him food. David realizes, I spoke rashly. And we don't have time, but you can also read in verse 39, we see David thanking God for not letting him do this. He spoke rashly with his lips, made an oath, and realized he was wrong. But as Chris brought up in Acts 23, verse 12, there were over 40 men that made a vow, made an oath, that they would not eat or drink anything until Paul was dead. And then Paul went to a different city. I wonder if they fulfilled that vow. I have a feeling they did, that maybe they spoke rashly with their lips, huh? And then just one other thing real quick. Find my note. Oh, in Mark 6, verse 23, Herod makes an oath. You can have anything up to half of my kingdom. Did he regret that? She asked for John the Baptist's head, remember? And Herod did not want that. But again, he spoke rashly, didn't he? So we see some examples of this happening in the New Testament. And then here's my notes where Jesus said, you don't need to worry about an oath in Matthew 6, 33 to 37. Tell the truth. But thank you for your time and attention. And Chris will pick up here wherever he sees fit.